Hi, everybody. It's BJ Miller from Mettle Health. We're here to do the remaining questions that we didn't get to today during the webinar on fearing death. Okay, Sonia, what do we got?
All right, we can start this off. This one is a bit of a comment and then a question following it. This person said, I very nearly died in 2016. It was a very surreal experience. People seemed and showed not to believe the reality and ignored it. What I also learned is that in that degree of suffering, kindness was all that matters. Do you
Hmm.
have any thoughts on how we can go about living our best life in the time we have left? And how can we protect ourselves in whatever time we have left?
Hmm. Wow. Well, I'm glad you're still here. Yeah, those near-death experiences are doozies. And it's interesting to hear your comment that it sounds like people around you struggle to acknowledge it. I think death, because I think what you may have experienced, I mean, I think it's sort of underlying our conversation is because we don't, as a people, as a society, find a way to include this big subject in our practical daily lives. Because we don't look at it, it remains unfathomable, impossible, out of reach for a lot of us in a daily way. So I'm sad for you. I imagine that was hard to feel uh, unseen in that moment. And I think that's telling. I think that's kind of where we are as a society. We just don't look. Now, as far as terms of counsel, how to live your best life with the time you have left, well, for one, I think you answered your own question in a lot of ways. How kindness was so much the thing, the basic thing that got you through, that registered as sort of the most important. That's a huge statement because kindness is pretty much always possible. Um, it's accessible. It's simple in a way. Um, like everything fundamental, we get in trouble if we don't do it, even if it's simple and fundamental. And we're not always kind to ourselves and each other, but by a long shot. So I think you answered your part of your question is remember that and move through this world kindly. And when you can't find your way to kindness, uh, learn how to forgive yourself, etc. I think that's so much of the work of living a rich, full life. I think you follow those cues and it'll take you very far from my experience, what I've seen. So, and I think otherwise, another kind of way to conceive of it, I mean, there is these, we've all heard of the bucket list, is this response to when we realize we're dying, then we make our bucket list and we drive our attention to those things, those very important things. And in other words, we're going to focus and take our time seriously and get to these things on our list. That's one response. And great. Okay. Another response, there's a TED talk on this one too, of course, and excuse the language, but I think the guy called it the fuck it list. And this is a man who was describing his experiences coming back from a near death, I think it was a stroke, or something like it. And he basically realized, like, he doesn't have a bucket list. It's more like he realizes sort of nothing is particularly important and therefore everything is important. And so kind of bucket, like, he was just going to follow his gut, see where he went, let go of things rather than to hang on to things more tightly. So in short, I think there's a nice rhythm between a pushing and pull that kind of can move you through life in a big way, is sort of playing off the bucket and the fuck it lists. Excuse the language again. So that's a way to conceive of it. Another is simply to just like try, care, end of story. Every day, try, give a shit, be nice, be kind, simple, basic, and make that enough. Learn how to be while you're doing things and accomplishing things. Learn how to be present while you do those things. Those aren't detours, that is life. So bring yourself to all those things like we talked today on the webinar, whether it's picking up dog poop or anything else. So it's sort of a demanding that you are here. It's and also being in touch with how little any of us is. It's sort of like I think we need to both find a way to embrace just how important and consequential our lives are, And in the same breath, how absolutely like a drop in the bucket, a piece, a grain of sand, a drop in the ocean. We are nothing. We are everything and we are nothing. We're huge and we're infinitesimally small. I think for my money, you gotta have to find a way to both of those. You have to accede to both of those conclusions and hold them all together. Move with both of those things, your bigness and your littleness. So anyway, those are some cues from what I've seen about leading a rich and full life. But I think you've got the raw ingredients of kindness, forgiveness, trying, caring. I think those will get you far. All right, that's all. That's what I have for now on that big question, but thank you.
Right, this next one's got a little bit of a lead up to it. This person said, everything you've talked about is also true for those of us who are diagnosed with a likely terminal illness and have to grapple with a shortened lifespan. Having gone through the personal inventory to figure out who I was and what would make the remaining time most meaningful to me, it made me wish I'd found a way to free myself of expectations and rid myself of toxic people, toxic jobs, worries. Have you ever found a way to help people go through this process without death as part of it? Or do you think it takes death to force us to be honest with ourselves and face ourselves squarely so we can better forge a present life that's as rich as possible?
Mm, yeah, well, I grapple with this one. I mean, I think I'm tempted to say, no, we don't need the threat to our lives to make us pay attention and to place ourselves in this life. But boy, that's that is the most durable way I've ever found. It was the threat to my own existence did that for me in so many ways, and everyone I've worked with in my job plays a version of that out. So I'm a little of mixed mind on this. I think I'd like to say that you don't need to have a mortal threat to appreciate your life. But I do think loss as a proxy for death, perhaps, or is exactly the same thing as death. Loss, change, these more daily phenomena, which can be kind of death's proxies, I think those can do it too. I mean, do you really need, like for me, I had to lose 3 limbs. I'd really need to lose 3 limbs to kind of wake up and pay attention, take my time seriously? Of course not. But I hadn't gotten to there otherwise, even though I'd been around a lot of loss. I think in some ways the mountaintop of getting close to death in real terms, losing body parts, terminal diagnosis, it puts you at a sort of a mountaintop of sorts. It gives you a line of sight to say, oh, this is what this feels like. And I think a lot of us realize what this feels like is not so different from what the rest of life felt like if we're really paying attention. So no, I don't. I guess I don't believe we have to come super close to death to appreciate life. But if it's almost like that's the wrong way to even think about it. We are always close to death if we're paying attention, our own or someone near us. And especially if we're paying attention to the smaller things like loss and change. That stuff's around us all the time. So what I'd like to believe is that we can head towards a more subtle place where we don't need these mega spankings and huge cues and massive shifts in our life to shake us. But can we drop our guard so much, drop our defenses so much that we actually become more sensitive as we get older, exquisitely so, that it's just falling of a leaf might bring a tear, or watching, 2 cats play is so poignant that it makes us weep. I'd like to believe, I'd like to conceive of getting older as getting more sensitive, not more numbed out, more scarred down, more cynical. So I think I'm doing right when I realize I'm becoming more sensitive. That's something that I find, and I have to remind myself that because sensitivity can feel like a hazard in this world, but I don't think it is. So I think my answer to your question is hedgy a little bit, but I think the bigger point here is that we're always close to death, whether we choose to see it or not. We're always losing things, whether we acknowledge it or not. So maybe you don't need to be dying, maybe you just need to pay attention to what is in front of you right now. Many of us just don't find our way to doing that until something massive happens. More conversations like these, more encouragements like these, and maybe we don't need tragedies to remind us of the poignancy of life. That's a hope, maybe something we can work towards.
Right, this next person said, my fear of death is around fear of not doing what it is I am here to do. Like I'll feel as if I don't realize my potential or serve in the way I want to. It takes a lifetime to learn, listen for our calling, and become skilled in order to serve. It feels terrifying to think that that journey could be cut short. Have you come across this before? How have you worked with it?
I have, and my answer, excuse me, might, well, I don't know how my answer is going to feel to you, but if I'm following your question correctly, the idea that you or any of us is put on this planet to do something for a purpose, for a reason. I'm here for a reason, and my job is to touch into that reason and play it out. Um, well, in this way, it's sort of like fate or destiny. I don't know that it's possible to subvert your own fate. So if there's some larger force that has put you or me here to do something, has invested us with a certain purpose, that force is bigger than us, obviously. And so what happens in our lives may be unexpected or may not feel like how we translated that purpose to what we translated that purpose to mean. So in the end, I don't think it's possible. If we believe that some external, some larger force, some God, some creator has invested us with a purpose, that's so thoroughly in us that I don't know that you can avoid it. I don't know that you can disappoint it. I don't know that you can subvert your own fate that way. Rather, what I think you might feel, what one might feel is, oh gosh, my interpretation or translation of what I thought that purpose to mean, or what I thought how it should play out, maybe that's the detail that I had wrong. And so in this way, perhaps, in other words, you can't fail. I think that's a really important message. If you believe that you are put here for a purpose, but I therefore believe that you can't fail it. It just may take unexpected turns. Your job probably then is more to surrender to whatever will be, not so much what you can make it. It's a discernment versus a directive. It's a rolling with and a surrendering to these forces that are bigger than ourselves that we don't always get to understand or to know. But you can't avoid it because it's in you, it's flowing through you. So if you're tempted to think you've wasted your life or you haven't made good on your purpose, I think that the trick there is to talk out, think out, process how maybe your just expectations yourself were a little bit off. Maybe that's more the problem. Again, I'm not sure if you've been given a destiny. I don't think you can fail it. Again, maybe that answer doesn't land with you. That may feel cheap, a cheap way out. But if the feelings are wondering, not, if the feelings are inadequacy, those are your feelings. That's not likely the bigger truth, for example. Okay. Thanks for listening. I hope that helps.
All right, this next person said, how do you deal with the sense of no longer being useful in the world as we grow old? How to share this frustration and pass on our wisdom to those we love who see the world differently? Does it matter because we will be dead?
So this is one you're getting at, one of the reasons why a lot of us kind of want to sound the alarm that Western society, this young country called the US, it's only what, 250, 200 whatever years old as such. One of the giveaways is that we're young, immature, in other words, society is how we handle inevitabilities like aging and death. We go to war with them. We think we can change them. We think they're not going to happen to us, or we just get them out of our line of sight so we don't have to think about them when we're otherwise robust and in our prime or something like that. It's a real shame because then we all feel ashamed and unseen, even while we're going through something very profound and universal. So I shudder when I think of all the wisdom that's just languishing in nursing homes, for example. In other ways, we've kind of warehoused our elders and gotten them out of the way. I think we could learn a lot from cultures who've been doing this longer than we have, that venerate their elders and look to their elders for wisdom, that lived experience, not just the idea, the shiny idea, but actually the lived experience of playing out an idea. So part of the theme of our conversations here of mental health and everything that we're trying to do and that palliative care stands for is trying to, yes, deal with individuals going through things, but also push society to make a different kind of space for these things. So I'm sorry I'm going on a little bit, but just to acknowledge the sort of sad and perverse place you might find yourself as an elder in this country. I wish it were otherwise. Let's make it otherwise. So I guess tactically, the way to do that is don't buy into the idea that you're no longer relevant. Even if that's the signals you're getting, even if you feel like you're being marginalized, don't don't buy that yourself. Keep sharing your stories. Keep being you in this world. As you know, is like I think as you get older, the wisdom, the cues are subtler. You're not going to be screaming and shouting, "I am wise! Look at me!" You know, it's almost a then therefore you're not wise or something like that. This is a quiet energy. Don't lose it, even if it goes unacknowledged by many people around you. I would suppose hold that faith and rest into the verity of your own experiences and the own truth that you know that the truth that you know that to be. And people will know, maybe subconsciously and increasingly consciously, people will notice. So there's some faith there too. Um, and then even more tactically, there are things like living wills. So living will, I'm sorry, no, an ethical will. Ethical will is an ancient tradition going back to Old Testament. It's basically a way to pass on wisdom, values, ideas, thoughts that you as an elder have over the course of baked over the course of a lifetime. And there used to be an oral tradition that we'd pass on to the next generations, but now you can write that out. So maybe it's a memoir. There are ethical will templates you can get online and to go through a process of leaving an ethical will for loved ones or for strangers who someday maybe will read it or listen to it if you record it or watch it if you make a video. So that's something you can do too, which I think is beautiful work for anyone who will listen to you or hear you, and also for yourself. So those are some ideas. Otherwise, also I think that like voting. We're in a representational government, represented government. Let's elect people who care about getting old, who care about what it means to die, to care about what it means to care for each other through vulnerable moments. You know, let's start finding politicians who sing those tunes and let's start driving policy to suit. There's a little bit of that in some of the policy agendas nowadays around home health and ways to stay safely at home and to support caregivers, et cetera. We got a long way to go though. So you can get politically active at the policy front, and the communications around policy. Depends where your energy is, depends where your interests are. Or you can just keep being and just have faith that people will notice one way or another. So there's my answer for now. But I'd love to hear your own answer to your own question. Maybe we can join us on the next webinar. You're the one living it.
Okay, this next person said, what would you recommend for a new spiritual but not religious chaplain who is new to encountering death and being a supportive presence to patients and families?
Well, I think there's a room for study here. Spiritual traditions in your training as a chaplain, interfaith, I think coming to understand how faith traditions have handled these questions, will tell you a lot. I think reading the Stoics, I think reading the existentialists, I think pay attention to the arts and what's behind why people make art in the first place or music in the first place. I think there are a lot of clues waiting for you there and material to work with. music thanatologist, for example, at the bedside can be an amazing piece of this puzzle, and you could probably learn a lot from just being part of that experience. Aside from that sort of homeworky stuff, I think your craft is as much about listening as anything else. So reading and becoming Rachel Remen's work on active or generous listening, I think is powerful. I think I think the idea of bearing witness, hearing someone, seeing someone, but holding back on the judgment or evaluation is an incredibly healing thing to do with your presence, and relatively straightforward and doesn't require a faith per se. So I think getting really good at listening actively, generously, I think getting really good at body language, and judicious, careful, thoughtful use of human touch and connection that way, aesthetically, I think holds a lot for you. So yeah, those are some starts. And again, those don't require any particular faith tradition. And I would watch the impulse. I think it would come out of our studies. I think we have the impulse that we're supposed to be the expert and teach people how to die. I'm not saying you're holding that view, but it creeps in just from the way we train ourselves and each other. So just reminding yourself that you know, this is an exchange. You may have something to share, your presence, a word of kindness, a touch, but they're going to have something to share about teaching you what it actually means to be in the bed of someone who's dying today or tomorrow. So just remembering that you're not there to teach people so much as you are to learn together, perhaps is the way to put it, or be together is maybe a more accessible way to put it. Again, that simple and that complicated. And over time, as you do this work, you'll find experiences, stories will light up, you'll learn. And eventually maybe you'll have something to actually say or do for someone that's honed from that honest taking in that you're doing now. But meanwhile, don't resist pressure to sound smart or wise, acknowledging sensations, acknowledging emotions, again, witnessing without judging. That's it. That's the action. That's where so much of the action is. So I'd point you there as the place to start.
All right, this last one is more of a rumination than a question. This person said, please riff on the idea that our souls return until they learn all they need to.
So this kind of reminds me of a Buddhist tradition, perhaps, that there's the wheel of life and death, and we only get off that wheel when we reach enlightenment. And enlightenment more or less means that we learn how to not suffer, essentially, or learn how to suffer in such a way that we don't suffer. This is where the words get a little tricky. But you're pointing to traditions that include things like karma, reincarnation, rebirth, and this idea that we are put on this planet to learn some things and we'll keep coming back. Our souls are tethered here until we learn what we need to learn. That requires some faith. I can't prove that that's the case. So one thought, just riffing as you invited, is to say there's a choice there to believe that on some level. There's a faith required. So recognize that. The source of this needs to flow through you, if not come from you. That's one point. Be careful. A hazard is that you don't use that as a tool for an out of touch or an overly loud self-critic. I have spent time as a disabled person wondering, why me? Why am I being punished? Why am I being punished? That I would be very careful if this idea of the soul returning to keep learning, that can trip into a self-loathing. I deserve this. I've earned this. I'm bad. I'm horrible. So I would just, from my mind, there's a real hazard around this faith, this belief system, and the penchant to hate myself, in short. Be careful if that's what's really playing out. But otherwise, those are sort of cautions. But otherwise, what you're pointing to me is a very beautiful notion. I think learning is a lovely, beautiful thing. It's not a punishment to come back to this planet. We get to come back to this planet and have all these experiences until we get right with reality. That's certainly the goal in my life. Whether I get another chance to try to do that, I don't know. I'm not sure if I wish for one or not. It's very difficult. I think I would wish for it. Bottom line is I'm here now. And so I guess I would let this point me back to life now, not the next life, but the life now. So what more can I learn? Where am I getting this right? Where am I getting this wrong? Interrogating yourself while loving yourself, please. These can be that response. So you can do that now. Start now. I guess that would be the real advice. And we'll see if we come back. We'll see. But let's try to get this go around right. And getting it right, and what we mean by getting it right doesn't mean achieving a bunch of things necessarily. I would say it's more like learning how to be in this world and learning how to be okay with reality, learning how to feel like we belong, learning how to see ourselves as belonging in that reality, learning how to not exclude anything from our frame of view, learning how to see everything as sacred and filled with potential and exclude nothing and no one and no parts of ourselves. To me, that's the big challenge. And I suppose that may perhaps that approximates some people's ideas of enlightenment, which would allow us to get off this wheel of life and death, of birth and rebirth. So anyway, there's your riff. I hope there's something coherent in there.
Right, I think that is all of them. Thanks so much, BJ.
Thank you, Sonia. And thank you, everybody. We'll see you guys around.